Great. Great, thank you very much for coming. This is Anthony Etherington.
Evening all.
And yeah, we're just going to do a sort of interview format thing. If anybody has any questions at all, just jump in. But yeah, would you like to talk a little bit about your book and how you would describe it? It's quite a bit of a genre bender.
Right, I like that. That puts me on par with David Mitchell then, so that's all right. Thank you, and thanks very much for inviting me this evening. It's lovely to be with you, and please, as Martin says, if you do have questions, please don't hold back. I mean, it's not as though we have a huge group tonight, so let's just have a conversation, I think is easier. Yes, where to start with Europia? I wanted to speak about the impact of technology and politics on people's lives. I had a setting, which was Europe, but one of the challenges I had was the book took so long to evolve that Europe kept changing and technology kept changing. When I first started writing the book that became Europia, it wasn't called that at the time, there was no Brexit, there was no climate crisis with a capital C, there were no social media at all. It just didn't happen. Bus stops didn't even have, now they have sort of times of buses coming and so on. I thought I was being very modern by having my bus stops having these signs. And then of course in 2008 or thereabouts it happened. So life overtook me. I was writing too slowly or life was moving too fast. I don't know. That was my first challenge. Hence the fact that I moved it forward. I thought, well, I'm not going to be caught now. I'm going to go to originally 2020, where I was caught, so I moved it to 2030. The other challenge I had was finding the character, because it's no good talking about politics and changes in our societies and so on, like some textbook. One of the first things I've learned over the last 20 years, mostly through screenwriting, perhaps we'll touch on that later, is the fact that our responsibility as authors is to entertain. Sure, we may have a message we want to put through, but we don't do that by hammering people just in sort of literary terms about what that message is. We need a character who people are going to root for, and that we can attach all the themes to in a simple and accessible manner. So that was the second challenge, and here my wife Robbie was helpful. Robbie used to be a teacher, and as I got into questions with, well, what's Europe going to look like in 15 years, and there's all this immigration, massive immigration sweeping up, and all these terrible things happening with people being traded and so forth, and then the sex issues with sex trafficking. Robbie had colleagues, single women, always women in this case, who would come home and regale us with their stories of internet dating. And some of it was okay. In fact, we know a couple who have found partners and are happily married, and that's fantastic.
You included.
Oh, brilliant! Thank you.
Then my wife went in there.
Yeah. So that was great. But some of the women who came round were having a really traumatic time, and it wasn't going well. And there was commitment phobia, I think, was one of the phases, and blokes didn't seem to want to settle down, etc., etc., etc. And worse, we have a niece of ours who is on the internet dating scene in London, and by golly, down there, sophisticated or what? I mean, there's some dreadful things going on. The sorts of pictures she would typically receive just because she responded to an advertisement. It turned our hair white. Well, it made me lose mine, so that was the problem. So that gave me the flesh to put on my central character. And that was essentially what led to Europia in the form it is now in. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, so you began with the setting and the idea of doing something political.
Yep.
And then found your way to that through the character.
Absolutely. I knew I needed a character. You can't just go into these things dry. But it was getting that character, and that experience helped that.
When did you start writing it?
Probably around 2001, 2002.
Oh, right, okay.
I set up self-employed. I went self-employed in 2000. And I knew that however busy I was going to be, however much pitching I did, however much networking and posting and all these activities, there would be times when I would have no work. And I expect you found exactly the same in your line of business.
Well, I worked until 2015.
Right.
And I've done exactly the opposite to you. And the book had been on the back burner since 1995. And so I got the idea, and then I said, enough. I made the pension, so I just went into it. And since then I've done 5 of them. But it's being able to devote that time to it, and devote the headspace to it, isn't it?
Right. Well, I perhaps you were more fortunate with your work, or a better work picture. I don't know, but I certainly wasn't working all the time. And it's great to be able to write and to have the discipline to write when I had downtime. So that experience of self-employment, I think, gave me the discipline to keep me at a desk for 8 hours a day, which was great. But one of the other things it gave me was I went around many businesses. Basically, I was delivering assessment and development services, educational services to companies. And they would employ me and I would go all over the country, and later on, after 2010, I'd go to the Middle East quite a lot. So I met lots of different people in different situations, which gave me plenty of ideas. And one of the things I did to feed that practice was to keep up to date with the news. Because if you're going out to Saudi Arabia to do a job, the last thing they want to talk about necessarily is what's going on in Redditch or whatever. They want to know, maybe what's happening in America, or what the big themes are in Europe, or what about our country? There's a lot going on in Saudi Arabia at the moment, etc., etc., etc. So staying abreast of the news was important for my work, but it also gave me lots and lots of ideas. And I keep a little file. I don't know if you do the same. With you'll see get ideas from the newspaper or off the television and so on. So I keep a file with all of those ready to start writing.
What inspired you to sort of set it in this fictional city? It's fictional, isn't it? My geography is not completely off.
No, you're absolutely right.
Because it seems Eastern European, but quite hard to pin down exactly where it is. But it seems deliberate, obviously.
Yes.
But yeah, it seems like a sort of a mushing of a few different places and cultures.
Yes, I think that. I mean, to be honest, I did base it primarily in Romania because Romania is next door to Ukraine. This was before Putin and Ukraine and all that business, but Ukraine is not in the EU. I was loosely basing the book in what we know as the EU. In the book, it's something different because times have moved on, and the spirit of Brexit. So we have Frexit, and whatever the Finnish equivalent is, and whatever the German equivalent. So the new settlement is one where independent states come together, but they remain independent, rather than perhaps the current picture, which is much more unified.
Right.
So you've had a sort of a disaggregation of states. So we had Karadir, the town of Karadir, which is based on a city in, I can't even pronounce it now, in Romania.
Yeah.
Why did I do it? Well, I mentioned at the start about going outside and getting away from things that were going to change quickly.
Right.
Moving to somewhere like Romania in the future gave me that bandwidth to flex the story,
Yeah.
what happened and so forth.
Because it's not a setting you see very often in literature or movies or anything. They tend to stick to America or occasionally the UK.
Yeah.
If they jump into the future. So
Yes.
it's quite unusual to see, especially from a British author, a take on the European sort of future.
Well, it was very
It's
important
very
to us, wasn't it? For years, we still have, of course, the debate about Europe in, Europe out. We need European people to come here to work, apart from us, and so on. And for years, we had that. And we still have to some degree, of course. But it was, it's to me, it's our near home.
Yeah.
But it just gave me that distance to enable me to use my imagination a bit more.
I really enjoyed the there's like a grimness to the city, to the town, where it's like a technological sort of grimness, where it felt a bit like a technological nanny state of sorts, where you've been on your computer too long, it just shuts off by itself, that sort of thing.
Yes.
Which I really enjoyed. Is that something that
It
has
is.
caught up to the book? Because now you've got people working from home, employers monitoring people through various bits of software, type keystrokes and that sort of thing.
Yes.
But that's very much, now that everybody's working from their own home, through laptops and things that are like employer controlled, it seems very relevant at the moment,
Yes,
especially post-COVID.
And of course, the trend was there. I mean, I know sort of seer. I don't,
Yeah.
I don't have a crystal ball and know what's going to happen. But I took themes that were happening. So I mentioned before mass immigration. And, it's happening. It's the state of the world at the moment. We have these waves of people flowing back and forth across the world. And technology was another issue. You could see. So the episode Martin's talking about there at the workplace, very obsessed with health and safety in this future world. So, you can't sit in front of your screen for 8 hours. So authors would have a rough time, wouldn't they? The computer would keep shutting down and saying, go outside for a walk. Oh, but if you do go outside, make sure to put your sunblock on and so on and so forth. So it is very, I didn't see it so much as a nanny state, but certainly this preoccupation, I think, with health and safety was very important.
It is actually quite relevant now.
It is?
Yeah.
Yes, definitely that.
It felt very like, I don't know if you've seen the older films by Terry Gilliam, like Brazil and things
Indeed.
like that.
Yeah.
It felt like a grounded version of that kind of thing, with like a slight projection into the future, and everybody's a little bit downbeaten, and there's perhaps too much control from above.
Interesting. I mean, that's there certainly. I think it's like this world, the world I've written about, I hope reflects the world we're in, which is where, of course, some people who have enough money and time on their hands and so on can have a great time. And there are a good number of people in our world who can do that. But for those who maybe have to do 3 jobs to pay for the kids' school uniforms and so on, life perhaps isn't quite as jolly. But the state does, the Union of European States, does do some things to help, just as our own states do. For instance, there's a great transport system. So in the city in which the action's set, you're not allowed to have private cars. They have to be parked outside. So if you take Redditch, there'd be a big car park like Car Park 2 at the Kingfisher, but that would be the other side of the ring road, a few miles out. So, but the transport inside that area is brilliant. Lots of buses and trams and so on. So it was great to actually write some positivity as well as the downside.
Yeah. I'm always just looking for the gloomy bits. How did it? Was it tricky to write a woman as a main character when it deals with things like human trafficking? There's some very traumatic experiences in the book. Just thinking about sort of online dating and that kind of thing. My wife's told me this before. There's a very different experience between men and women, where apparently it's quite a common thing where a man's worst fear is that the woman doesn't look how he expects. The woman's worst fear is that she will be murdered. So it's a very different experience.
That's fascinating. Margaret Atwood once said that's probably where it comes from.
Oh, maybe.
Women, men fear that women will laugh at them. Women fear that men will kill them. And I thought, well, blimey, that puts it in perspective a bit, doesn't it? Yes.
Did you address that? I mean, that's a very valid point, I think, even today, that what people see, what people feel is going to happen, what people experience is something totally different often. Were you able to put that deeply into this book? They may fear they're going to be killed, but it generally doesn't happen.
Yeah, I mean, my view is it's essentially, it is a novel, it's a work of fiction. So that gave me license, I think, to talk about the things that I perceive may happen. Of course, we may all have different views of that. And I guess what works is when the book strikes a note with a lot of people, which is why Margaret Atwood is such a big seller, because a lot of people recognise what's in the books, and that goes for many great authors. I didn't feel compelled to go down a particular road, but back to your point about writing as a female, I wanted to give the experience of my character, who was being abused But I didn't want that to be the feature. This is not a book about abuse per se, and this is not some deep insight into the world of sex trafficking and so on. It's there, it's a theme, and she certainly suffers because of it. But I didn't want it to be something that would just horrify people or terrify people. It needed to be within reach. I wanted to bring people on board so that they could understand what this woman was going through, rather than alienate them. I'm sorry, does that pick up on the point that you were asking?
I think it probably does. It's this. I do read the news every day, but I read the news as in that much, not that much, and I pick up on all the negatives that are in it. Whereas the world in general isn't as negative as it paints, and I think it's good to have a character that does that sees the negative and might still experience some of the negative, but ultimately finds it's fairly anodyne and benign. Yeah.
Yes, I mean that was one of the joys about writing. One of the joys about writing a female character, from my point of view, was that of course I could stand right outside myself. And that was great because I've got ample experience on which to draw. So, to give you an example, I worked for 40 years before I retired. I worked in the NHS, I worked in retail, I worked in personnel. What those three got in common, the majority of the workforce are women. So I'm not one of those people that grew up thinking, what is it, men are from Mars and women are from Venus, I think, is that the title? And I don't go for that. I can see it, and certainly if you get cliched characters, I can see it. There are certain blokes who are certainly from Mars, there are certain women who, okay, we can see, probably from Venus. But I've met, and I'm sure you have too, men who, or women who are far more aggressive than some men, and many men who have as much emotional intelligence as many women. So to me, I don't see them in two camps. I prefer to look at people in continuums. I don't know what the Latin is, continua, I don't know, but a continuum.
Yeah.
So have several continuums: passive, aggressive, introvert, extrovert, planful, spontaneous and playful. And that's probably because of the work I've been doing for 35 years or whatever it is, as a psychiatric nurse originally, and the work I subsequently went into in HR was very much in that sort of psychology educational basis. And that's a much more helpful a model, I think, rather than, well, you're a bloke, so this is how you're going to respond to this situation. You're a woman, and this is how you're going to respond to this situation. It's so unhelpful.
Yeah.
You've got me on the subject now. So have I answered your question?
Yeah,
or did you?
So it's interesting that you're sort of like trying to distance yourself from your characters and the situation. So there are some authors who, almost every book they write is very similar because it's all from, their own personal perspective. Stephen King always writes about writers, for example, things like that.
Yeah.
But you seem to have a different approach of trying to separate yourself from the subject matter, or at least write about something that isn't your day-to-day. Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely. I try and get away from me. One of the big problems I have is doing blokes, because I tend to fall, if I'm not careful, into cliche, and that's not always helpful. Sometimes it is. I mean, there's a woman in here who's cliched, and she's meant to be, because that's her role. But blokes, because I suppose I spend less time. I do spend time in male company, but I spend much more time in my working life in female company, and so it sort of felt easier.
Yeah.
And blokes too. Oh God, I shouldn't say this, but sometimes they do seem to approach life in a little simpler way. I'll give you an example, a common one, and please shout me down or whatever. Typically, most of our friends who have teenagers, typically the boys seem to be a bit and a bit lazy, and typically the girls are petrified of underperforming. They're forever wanting to please, and I don't necessarily mean that in a negative way. I mean, I can think of two. You're smiling, you'll know who I mean. Who are charming young women, but according to their parents, they are completely uptight and worried about their performance, letting their family down, or when they're at school doing their work and doing well and being seen to be pretty and attractive and clever and so on and so forth. There's two great stereotypes,
Yeah.
but they're not in my book.
Do you so how much pre-writing do you do? Do you decide what each character is like before you jump into the story, or is it more something where you find them as you go? Some authors, I've done it myself, where you make little biographies for them, you cast them with film actors, you try and get a handle on who they are before you start, which can often, for me especially, just be procrastination. But a lot of writers find it very useful to do that, but some other ones obviously will just jump in and figure out who they are as they go. Is that more your vibe?
I'm in the middle.
Oh, right, okay.
Definitely. I like a bit of planning. I need to know, roughly what X or Y looks like. Tall, short, dark, bald, bearded, not, just a rough feel of what the individual is and what her background is. But then I like to get into the writing, because I find that the writing poses questions. You can feed back into the character to sort of flesh out that character and to put more flesh on the bones. And by putting him, her in various situations, which is the plot, as the plot unfolds, oh, blimey. So, for example, Marta in this, is a very assertive woman. She knows what she wants and she goes about getting it. But inside, she's equally asking herself questions about, is that the right thing to do? Will my cat be safe? Or is this relationship going to fall through just like the last one? So you have this quite complex and, I guess we'd say, flawed character. I'd say human.
Yeah, I find it interesting how you get to those sometimes, because you can buy books on Amazon which are like, here's a list of 500 character flaws that you can give your character, and there are books which do the same with plot,
Definitely.
like Save the Cat and that sort of
Yes.
thing. How do you feel about using templates to either plot your story in advance or as a troubleshooting tool?
It's not my bag really. I like, I must say, as a screenwriter, and that sounds very grand as a screenwriter, I should explain. I started out, so I said year 2000, starting self-employed, so I started writing short stories. That was great, that helped me. I'd already written a novel back in the 80s, and that had not been a success. I mean, I enjoyed it, and I loved the thrill of it, but it wasn't a great book. So I took up short stories. And so when it came to being self-employed, I had the short stories to hone my art, as it were. And I used to submit the short stories competitions to get feedback and see how I performed against other writers. It gave me a feel for, well, am I any good? Can I do this? How can I be better? So as part of that, I would also go on courses, read books, watch videos and so forth. So I'm a big fan of that.
Right.
But within reason.
Right.
One of the dangers I felt was that you can start getting into the tick box syndrome. Well, wait a minute, Stephen King does this,
Yes.
so I need to do this.
I'm guilty of that myself.
And the danger is, of course, that's Stephen King's success. You've got to find your own voice. You've got to find your own way through this mess.
Yeah, I have that struggle of reading too many books on how to do it, so then you end up doing it however these 5 different people tell you how to do it. And then before you know it, you're completely lost in the woods, and you're not really telling your own story anymore.
Absolutely.
You're telling something to their structure.
Yes.
Which is very easily done.
Yeah, well, there was this big thing. Sorry, forgive me, I must just finish the story about Screenwalk. How the hell did we get into Screenwalk? So, Robbie and I had a conversation. I had some reasonable success with the short stories, as in, finalists, semi-finalists, and so on. But I wasn't getting published. I couldn't sort of break through that door. So we had a conversation one night, and it went something along the lines of, why are you so frustrated? And so, what would you really like to do? I said, we are great cinema goers, by the way. We love film. So I pointed up at the screen, an imaginary screen, and said, I'd like to be up there. So Robbie said something like, what are you waiting for? So then, that's 2010, I turned to screenwriting. And that was great. So I went on a course with Arvon, which is the largest writing.
I love Arvon, yeah.
Fantastic.
I did a
writing
course with them. They're brilliant.
Fantastic, yeah. So I did a week on writing for film with them, up in Ted Hughes' old house in Yorkshire, Hebden Bridge. And it was a week where in the mornings you watched films, And in the afternoons you critiqued them, and in the evenings you spoke about them. And that was fantastic. This is for me. I want this life. This is great. Yeah, forget the writing. Let's just watch films and critique them.
That sounds great.
But that was a great launch. So I got into screenwriting. I wrote for 10 years. It was fantastic. I, again, had some modest competition success, but I never spoke to, never got through to one producer, one agent, one director. And
Oh,
that,
really?
don't forget, I was trying. It wasn't through
Yeah.
lack of trying.
Yeah.
So that was it. I said, well, wait a minute now. I'm 60 plus. This was 3-4 years ago. And I need to do this. So I took the screenplay for Europia and I wrote the novel.
Oh, okay. So it started life as a screenplay first.
It started life as a novel back in 2000, 2005.
Yeah.
Very different, but
Right.
the ambers, the sort of ashes of it were there. That's not the right word. Then it became screenplay.
I was going to ask you about the screenwriting because obviously you've won competitions for your screenwriting.
2, yes.
And I used to want to get into the film business myself before I realised when I was like 30 that I'm from a tiny little town in Wales and there's no film industry in tiny little North Wales. So
Go south, young man.
yeah.
Cardiff, huge.
Yeah. So you were writing, when you were writing your screenplays, were you coming up with the concept yourself and then writing them and trying to pitch them around rather than the other way of, getting into anything like production companies and then seeing what they were after?
No, excellent. Being a great question because that is a big concern of a lot of people in the screenplay industry and I suspect in novel writing. Do I follow the crowd? What's the trend? Oh, serial killer. Let's take 10 years ago. Got to be a serial killer, hasn't it? That's the only thing that's selling around. So let's do serial killers. Then we'll do some car chases and whatever else.
We trying to sort of do I know a lot of filmmakers try and do like a signature piece, like a calling card, like Reservoir Dogs for Tarantino. They try and do a film or a script that is all of their interests all at once, as commercial as possible and as cheap to film as possible. Was it tough to write for films with those kind of imaginary budgetary constraints?
Yes.
You've got to bear in mind somebody's got to make it at the end of the day.
Yes, it was. Because I wanted to write the stories I wanted to write. I decided early on, again, perhaps because of my age, and I'm not going to be making a career out of this, as in terms of it won't pay the bills, so I can do really what I want. And so I didn't follow the genre, or I didn't follow the latest marketing, or what have you. And so I'm still sceptical of that, to be quite honest.
Yeah.
When you see the real breakthroughs, very often they're people doing something quite different or novel.
Yeah, that's what the template style books are. They break down Hollywood films and they say at page 5 on every successful Hollywood script, someone does this, at page 10 someone does that, at page 30 someone does that. Yeah. And it's very much what has already worked rather than...
Absolutely, no, that's a great point. No, so I tried not to do that. I wanted to write my own screenplays and I wanted to write my own novels, and the latest novel, which is coming to an end, well, it's been coming to an end for the last 6 months, but it's coming to an end soon, is exactly the same. It's what I want to write. And then great. I want to write novels that excite me. And if they excite other people, that's fantastic. But essentially I need to get it off my chest.
Yeah.
So that's it. But unfortunately, this one, you can gauge it like to some extent through, people write reviews now and so forth, don't they?
Yeah.
And on Amazon or on Goodreads, that's over 80% are 4 or 5 ratings.
Yeah,
so the majority of people are sort of enjoy it. You'll always get, of course, the 2 out of 5 or the 1 out of 5. I hated this, it's rubbish. Of course, you can't please all the people all the time, can you? But you get a sense that you're hitting the spot, which is very gratifying because I don't want to sound selfish, but I'm not going to be writing for that much longer, so I might as well do once.
You've got like 30 years in the
Well, absolutely, yes.
He hasn't told me that.
We had Alice and Jean Lester in a couple of weeks ago, and she was talking about the importance of getting feedback on your work during the process. Is that something you look for, or would you rather finish it and then get feedback on the sort of a finalish draft do you show early versions of your work to anyone, or?
No, I'd go all through. I would get completely immersed in all the negatives
Right.
if I went down that. So what I tend to do is finish the first draft.
Yeah.
Then I will edit it myself, go through it myself, and then I will hand it to my trusted reader, or readers now, because our son has put his hand up too.
Oh, brilliant.
Now, of course, it would be great if I had, what could we call it, also on hand professional writers.
Yeah.
I'm afraid I don't know.
One of those groups like J.R. Tolkien and C.S. Lewis and the same
Yes,
groups.
absolutely great one. Yeah,
We're working on that here.
Yeah, that'd be fantastic. Well, there you are. You've got this support group. You're fortunate. And that's a really serious point, because one of the things I did love about screenwriting was collaborating in the critiquing of work. Having the confidence to share your work with other people, I think, can help tremendously. And I would if I could. If I knew 4 authors and so forth, I might have that conversation. But certainly in screenwriting, I loved it. It's sharing your work, it's getting to speak. I would only have done it at the end, though. I wouldn't do it halfway through.
Right.
So
Yeah.
that's just my preference.
I see a lot of forums online where you can share your writing, and they make me very sweaty.
Yeah.
Just the idea of, it's hard even with people in the room with you who you've got to know, but complete strangers online, it's a bit of a...
But there's a real art, isn't there, to constructive criticism. It's not being soft. It's not being, oh, you're a nice bloke, therefore I'm not going to tell you about the bits I don't like, I'll just tell you about the bits I like. But it's also delivering constructive criticism in a constructive and supportive manner, rather than sort of throwing blood over you.
Yeah, you have to find people who have gotten good at doing that themselves.
That's actually skills, and forgive me if I'm teaching Granny to suck eggs, but if you are in a writing group, one of the speakers I'd have is how to deliver constructive criticism, how to support one another through criticism. It can be so helpful.
Yeah, we've struggled with that quite a lot, just because we're all very nice to each other. Which is, it's a difficult barrier to get over, especially when you don't know each other very well. You're in your group, everybody's at different levels. Some of us have been doing it for years, and we have people who have just started out, have just retired, and thought, I'll have a go, get my memories down into a story, that kind of thing. It's very tricky to
I think the problem I found
gauge that.
when I came is because the first thing I said was I've been writing for some time. The criticism I got was, well, yeah, okay, that's Austin, isn't it? And then moved on. So for the first couple of weeks, I didn't get the proper critique. And then once I just buried myself into it, people were able to critique it. And I'm not a frightening person. And I do take negative criticism really badly. But I'll write it down, I'll go and lick my wounds and then get on with it.
Yeah.
But it's important, I think, to have that criticism. How do you handle negative criticism?
I put it in a basket. I like to look at things overall because, of course, ultimately it's people's opinions, and however structured those opinions may be, however well thought through or well meant, they are opinions. So I try and look at a basket, which is why I mentioned, for instance, the Amazon and Goodreads feedbacks. So you get an overview. So don't worry so much about the 1 out of 5 if 80%, 90% of them are rating it 4 or 5. That suggests that the majority of people feel a certain way. So I try to put it in a basket, and I see, well, is that theme echoed? Have other people said that or touched on that theme?
I see it like Statler and Waldorf out of the Muppets, the two in The Gods.
Oh, yeah.
I thought it was great, I thought it was terrible. They would always say diametrically opposed things. And I found that's my experience too. You get loads and loads of goods and you get one so bad, it hurts.
Yes.
And then you get more goods again.
But it's still, it's still worth, what's in there, what's in that negative one, what's prompted them to go down this road? Can I learn from it? I guess you asked how I would handle it. Is there something I can learn from that negative review? There's usually something in there. They may have exaggerated it. They may be someone too. It's like all rating systems, isn't it? I'm someone who will never give a 5. I'm sorry, I'm playing to you. Why should I never give a 5? Well, you don't. It's got to be the greatest thing ever. It's got to be Shakespeare. Well, nobody gets anywhere with that, do they?
That's the problem with online reviews, isn't it? You don't know who they are. So if I give feedback to Connor in the group, he can be like, oh, Martin's a cheeseball. He likes Stephen King. There's no monster in this, so he was probably a bit bored. Whereas if I did it,
think that half as well. When I send my stuff to you, I'm like, he's not going to like it. There's no monster.
but if I did it online, he wouldn't be able to, you know, balance that out and say, oh, you know, there's no kung fu in it, so he's never going to like this.
It's interesting.
You found out my next script.
It's interesting you mentioned Stephen King though, because one of the most entertaining and enlightening books I read on writing was Stephen King's.
It's brilliant,
on
isn't it?
writing,
Yeah,
which I'd recommend to any would-be writer. I think it's absolutely great. I mean, because
definitely.
it's not a textbook in the sense that, well, you need to structure a chapter like this, and you need to get to turning point 1 by page 35 and all that.
Yeah,
It's great. It's full of anecdotes about how, for instance, he was working a trailer park and went into one of the caravans, and there's a 6-foot crucifix at the far end. No television. And lo and behold, Carrie was born. And it's great, you know, it's enlightening things like that. But it also says, you know, one of the lessons I remember from it was he had, what do you call those, paper spikes or something?
oh yeah, I
He used
know
to
what
put
you mean.
bills on and what you know, put your hands.
Desk spiders.
And he said he's got 4, I think, before he ever got a job. And goodness me, that's Stephen King.
Yeah.
So-
And his wife famously rescued Carrie out of the bin because he thought it was terrible and
Oh,
threw
really?
it away. Yeah.
Ah, blimey.
And
I'd
she was like,
forgotten
no, this is pretty good, there's something here. And then obviously it became his
Yeah.
bestseller.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so
I love reading writing advice from writers where they're very straightforward and very meat and potatoes about it. Like Lee Child in interviews is fantastic because he's just like, I don't plan anything, I just sit down and make it up. I get to the end and then I hand it in. I don't even revise it.
oh, brilliant. Oh, I wish.
Yeah.
Like
very-
that.
It's
That's
interesting.
because he's got an editor, has he? Who
We've got a
does
lot
that?
of
Oh
Sorry.
yeah, he will have an editor.
Probably,
Yeah.
yeah.
I don't. Have you got an editor?
No.
Did you find it difficult to get your book published?
Forgive me hesitating on that because it's a long story. I'm just thinking I'm very happy to go down that road. I just
No,
want to
yeah,
check if that's.
I was absolutely going to ask
Okay.
you about your experience with publishing.
All right. Did I find it difficult to get?
A publisher.
Right. I'm wondering now how far to go back. Let me go back to when I decided, having gone through this route that I've described to you, short stories, screenplays, blah, 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 a novel. As I said, I was about 64, 65 when I thought, right, I'm going to do a novel now. No, buggering around. So, what I did was research, because the first novel I'd done was 30 years before, so I was not familiar with what the setup is. Of course, we all know about Bloomsbury and Penguin Random House and Pan and HarperCollins, the big traditional companies. And basically what they do is give you an advance if they commission you. And that's what I would call traditional publishing. For a long time now, there's also been self-publishing. Again, apologies if I'm teaching granny to suck eggs, but self-publishing is where typically you do everything. So you find a distributor, you find a printer, you find a cover designer, you source the paper, blah, 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 blah.
Definitely not the easy way.
No, and you pay for that. You cover it. I found, and I didn't know about these, but in the middle, partnership publishers or hybrid publishers. Have you heard of it? Is this phrase familiar? And I didn't know anything about these people, so what is this about? So I researched it. And what I found was, there must be well over 100 of such organisations in the UK, from like one-man bands who were almost like used car salesmen. I got one offer, send me the correction by tomorrow, £999. He then spoke at me for 45 minutes and said, done. Yeah, I'll do it for you. And I thought, I wasn't too happy with that approach. So there's a whole range of people in the middle, so-called hybrid and partnership publishers, who will do certain jobs for a fee. It might be they do everything, and you pay a very high fee. It might be they just print and do the cover, maybe distribute, and you pay a lower fee. Usually there aren't any editors involved with partnership companies. Typically, I'm sure there must be one or two somewhere, but I didn't come across it. You had to self-edit.
That's not what you call self-publishing.
No, self-publishing is definitely where you do the lot.
Yeah.
People are finding.
So this is
This-
they take over the more marketing
Yeah, absolutely.
and
So,
manufacturing side of things.
yeah, I mean, taking Europia, I narrowed down the list to 3 that I thought had a chance. I didn't want anyone who immediately said they wanted me. I wanted some debate there. I wanted some questioning. I wanted to know much more about them. I wanted to meet them, which many don't offer the opportunity. It's all done over the phone or the internet,
Right.
which worries me. I want to sit down in a room and meet these people.
Because they nick your idea, wouldn't they? I
Well,
mean, they might.
they might,
Somebody
yeah.
might, you know.
They might.
Just give it to anybody to, you know, edit or whatever.
So my conclusion was there are a lot of unscrupulous people out there who are pretending to be publishers who are actually just after the money. I came down to about 3 companies. There were many criteria. What do their books look like? So I checked out their books physically, holding them, looking at them. What's their editing like in the sense of copy editing? Are there typos?
Right.
What's the grammar like? Are there any, glaring errors? One of the ones that was on my shortlist, then I got hold of one of their books. It was by a well-known television personality that had probably 3, 4, 5 typos, spelling errors on every page. I can't go to you. There's no way I could have that.
Because they was very thorough.
No. I got the contracts from each one of the contracts, and again, the company I've just mentioned to you, their contract was something like 9 pages, and a lot of it looked as though they'd cut and paste
Oh, okay. So
off the internet or something. Was this company?
professional.
Their contract was 2 pages. I would call it plain English. So you read a sentence, and I'm no lawyer. You read a sentence, you actually got a feeling for what it meant. So I'll give you an example. Rights. Many of these companies will take your rights. Well, that's not a good thing for someone who hopes to get a long life for their book, or who hopes that their book will be bought and turned into a film, where there's a lot more money typically.
There's a lot of sharks in that sort of
Absolutely.
area. I know Amazon were terrible for it. They set up their screenwriting sort of feedback competition
Yep.
website, and anything you submit, they owned the rights to then for a full year, whether you submitted it anywhere else or not. And they were literally just stealing people's intellectual property, and holding it ransom for a year.
My contract has a year time limit. In fact, it just come up for renewal or not. And they set that in the contract. In a year we will review. And they also said this is for this format. Any other formats, radio, audio, film, are not covered by this contract. So I retain the rights for those. And you want to know that at the start before you get into trouble. So that was one thing that was important. Their covers were very important to me. So the 3 shortlisted people I looked at covers. And the company I've just dissed, one thing it did have going for it was it had some very nice covers. So I thought, well, that's good because the cover's important.
Yeah.
It says a lot about what's going on and what the issue is. What's that about? What does that mean? Quality of paper. Is it from renewable sources? All of these things. So I would advise, if you were going down that road, to make yourself a big, long checklist of all the things you want to see in whoever's going to publish your work. Apart from, of course, not the final question, how much is it going to cost? Because, as I say, my cheapest of the 3 was not the one I chose for in the end.
So is it the case that I had a quick look online for the publisher you went through?
Yep.
So is it you put up an upfront fee, and the more you put up, the more of the royalties they take?
Right, I can't speak about the other publishers now. I can only speak about the Book Guild, who published this book. And their approach is that you agree upon, they make you an offer.
Yeah.
So your book is read first. I got 2 readers' reports, and the readers' reports said essentially, yeah, we think this has some potential, commercial potential, so we would recommend a yes. Thank you very much, readers. I didn't suggest them. And then I get an offer, and that offer said we'll meet 55%, the publisher will meet 55% of the printing costs that are taken from our self-printing Troubadour, I think it's called, their self-printing arm. And that would cost you X. So then you decide, yes, that's acceptable or not. That money was taken over the next 3 to 6 months. So the final payment had to be paid before publishing. Well, as we were talking, going through proofreading, going through jacket design and so forth, marketing plan, for around 6 months. I think it was about 6 months before I had to pay all the money. In terms of the royalties, One of the pluses, if you get the right partnership stroke hybrid agreement, royalties tend to be higher than the traditional. So Pan will say, here's 5, 10, 15, 20, however lucky you may be, grand for your book, but your payments will be 45 pence a book, let's say.
Right.
Please don't quote me on these figures, and they vary enormously depending on whether your name's, Will Self or whatever, or Anthony Etherington. For mine, I get, if it's sold at the recommended retail price, I get around 160, 170 a book.
Right.
Which is helpful.
Yeah.
But of course, when you actually work it out, given what I've paid, I'd have to sell something like 2,000 books at the recommended retail price to break even. And I can assure you I have not sold 2,000 books at the recommended retail price. One big surprise did come from ebooks. I sold more ebooks than paperbacks.
Oh, right, brilliant.
And that's another question. Will your, if you were to go down the hybrid publisher road, will the publisher do paperback? Because paperback is much more accessible to readers. For a start, that's going to be under £10. If it was in hardback, it would probably be 14, 15 or £16. Not when you're a debut novelist that people have never heard of. Is that a good thing? So that's something else to bear in mind.
Would you recommend that as a route over self-publishing? How would you have found it if you had to do all of the source of cover artists and
Great.
do all of your marketing?
Well, great point. I think in the position I was in, I keep on talking about my age. I haven't got to hang up about my age. Time, I want to move on now. I've been an apprentice for long enough.
Yeah.
So I wanted action. And
Right.
what this route gave me was action. So I got published within a year. Robbie and I went to speak with an agent, went to see an agent speaking at the Stratford Literary Festival a few weeks back. And they said, we're now looking at 2025.
Right.
And I'm thinking, I haven't even got my work to her, my MS to her. And they're talking 2025, so presumably we're talking 2026. They did it within a year. So that's another thing that was important to me at the time.
Yeah.
If I'd been younger and had time on my hands, I might have tried. Well, the first thing I would do definitely is try and get an agent.
Right.
That would be the big thing. And you've had plenty off me about agents.
Yes, I'm currently trying and failing to get one. I've had about 25, 30 rejections.
Well done.
But
Well, at
they're
least
very,
you tried.
yeah, they're very slow.
Yes.
Though in the time it's taken to get a response from some agents, you've published that book.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that, as I say, is
beginning to end.
an advantage.
And I've heard that it takes a year or two to get an agent, and then you have to get your agent to pitch your book to publishers, which can be another year, and then you have to go through the production process with editors and that kind of thing. That could be a year again.
Yes.
So it's a very slow process, isn't it, traditionally?
Forgive me interrupting. That may get you to somewhere where you could sell 5, 10, 15,000 books.
Yeah. That's
The downside being a first timer. And have you had any of your books published?
All mine are self-published. I've done everything myself apart from the ISBN number.
Right.
I'm selling them every day.
Okay.
I'm not selling them in huge quantities, but I'm sort of resonating with everything you're saying at the moment as the sort of pain thresholds that I've been through. I won't go to agents. I was told very early on by a reporter friend in Worcester that you just paper the toilet with rejection letters, and every one of those is a waste of your time. You might as well just get on and do it. So I went in. I've sourced my covers myself. I've drawn them and taken the photos myself.
Wow, that's
passed them through fine art graduates. I've written the books. I've compiled the books myself, created all the interiors, and compiled the whole thing. I've got several proofreaders and editors that are going through it with me to make sure that I'm staying on track. But that is hard work. Yeah. And so, I'm resonating with this sort of partnership approach that you're saying in the middle.
Yeah. That's one of the things that I've found myself. I used to self-publish horror comics. So I would write the scripts and then get artists, professional ones, but up-and-coming ones, so they're quite cheap. And then they would do the artwork and that sort of thing. And I found that when you're self-publishing, your actual writing time shrinks to almost nothing because you're so busy doing the other things. So the middle ground does sound quite
does,
attractive
But
when you.
yeah, beware, caveat emptor, isn't
Yeah.
it? I think you really need to go into it. And I'm a member of the Writers Guild of Great Britain. One service they offer, which I would thoroughly recommend, is they look at contracts. So I was able to look at contracts with them, and they said, for instance, the atrocious company I mentioned earlier, or the disappointing shortlisted company, it's an absolute nest. And this thing about rights is so important. In fact, the same Writers Guild published maybe 6 or 8 months ago a study of hybrid publishing versus self-publishing, and they came down absolutely on self-publishing because
really?
at least the retention of the rights to them is so important.
Yeah, and you can do it. We've had recently statistics through the library associations and that sort of thing about what the most popular books are in libraries, and I think they're mirrored on Amazon as well. And I remember the Amazon one, the top writer was Lee Child, and the second was L.J. Ross, who's completely self-published. She writes thrillers set in Northumberland. They've got really nice covers that look like the train tourist posters. But yeah, and she's completely self-published and has managed to outsell Stephen King.
Yes, she's 7 million, I think she's up to.
Yeah, it's madness.
LJ who?
L.J. Ross.
Ross. Okay.
Yeah,
She has her own publishing company, so Dark Skies, I think it is.
Oh, right.
Is her publishing company, but it's not.
Right. Yeah,
It's
you
just
put a name on it.
people who
Make it
publish
look
with her. So she's created her own press, her own imprint, in effect, which is what I've done.
Why would you be tempted away from that? Because it takes so much time. Is that?
Yeah, that and grandchildren.
Right.
I'm not tempted away from it. I'm really just exploring things.
Right.
Originally, I explored publishing, but found out that there was I hesitate to say it with the tape on, there's a glass ceiling, and getting through that into publishing is really, really difficult. And I thought, I could die before then. Let's get on with it.
No, good for you.
Yeah,
I can
so
see
that's
that.
what I've done.
Did I answer your question on
Yeah.
publishing? But is there anything I
you
haven't?
did. That's basically your second.
No. Forgive me. It's my
You
first
looked at-
published.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah, the 30-year-old one was
Yes,
in the
doesn't
drawer.
count. Okay. No.
Not good enough.
On the theme
Yes.
of grim technological advances,
Yes.
have you seen what AI can do? Have you got any thoughts on how people are using AI to write novels?
Do it
A lot.
all for you.
There's a lot of talk of Hollywood screenwriters especially talking about this because, who cares who writes Transformers films? But they, there's AI now where there's one called ChatGPT, which you can use yourself, where you can go in and you can say to it, give me a pitch about just as one I've used myself, a futuristic science fiction thing with anti-gravity racing ships. And it'll do that. And then you can say, right, break that down into a structure of a short story. And I'll do that for you.
Yes.
It's not very creative. It's very cliched, and it's a bit ham-fisted. It doesn't really give you can't give you anything nuanced. It just gives you essentially googling things and giving you the mush back of you want this and let's put it in this structure. But a lot of people are turning to that to, if not write their novels, then at least help structure them, help them with log lines and pitches and that sort of thing. To the point where I think Tor, the publisher, has stopped accepting submissions for the manuscripts because they're worried about people generating them with AI. Is that something that you would ever use in your own work? Is it something you feel particularly strongly about, or?
Well, in terms of in terms of writing, no, I wouldn't go near it.
Right.
End of. In terms of my concern for society, it worries me hugely, because where does truth end and truth begin? And again, that came into this book. Not AI, of course, but certainly social media and the internet and so on, because they're such brilliant tools. I mean, crikey, as writers, what a brilliant resource. I want to know the colour of a bishop's robes in Romania in the 20th century. Well, I've got that answer in 2 minutes probably. Fantastic resource, and yet what do we hear and what do we see is a number of people are abusing it. So I'm thinking of trolling and sexting and the hatred and abuse that's promoted by some individuals, and the power that a few individuals have, so trolls, to generate so much hatred and misinformation. I find that frightening, so goodness knows where AI is going to take us.
Yeah.
What gives me heart, and firstly I wouldn't go near it myself simply because what's this for?
Right.
What's the point of wanting to write a novel if you're going to go to a piece of software to help you with it, or to do it for you? The only thing that keeps me sane is that the vast majority of people, I think, using the internet probably use it for beneficial purposes and for the good of themselves and their family and mankind. I hope I'm not overly naive in that. And secondly, my determination that whatever happens, I won't be going near it for this purpose.
Right.
On Facebook,
Yeah.
stuff like that.
I've used it here. I've typed in, like, give me a Facebook post about Lego Group.
Yeah.
And it'll knock one out, put emojis in it, and make it look very
fine.
authentic.
It has its uses. And research, for writers, the internet, I'm a great fan.
Yeah.
Sure, the library is useful, but forgive me, but if you're researching, you don't want to have to be walking into Coventry in our case, every other day.
There's this sort of dark pocket of self-publishing, I've noticed, where they just churn them out in a numbers game.
Yeah.
They repost the same stories with different titles, different covers. They pull little tricks, like they'll put 300 stories in one book just to try and trick themselves up the Amazon rankings. So they're not really writing anything, they're just kind of repackaging stuff they found online.
Yeah.
And the worry is that AI is going to lead to a lot more of that sort of thing, so self-publishing is going to get harder as a result. Like, easier to write the thing if you want to use it, but harder to stand out from the crowd if,
I'm sure
these
you're
sort
right.
of online entrepreneurs are just churning stuff out, where they used to use freelance writing websites. They pay someone in India like £5 for a 20,000 word short story, that sort of thing. And they're outsourcing it to computers.
Yeah, and when you get into the case of students using
Yeah.
the internet to write their essays, what is the point of going to university if that's what you're going to do? I mean, it's just, do people have self-respect?
Yeah.
Perhaps I'm just naive, but
Yeah, I'm hoping it'll go, it'll get to a tipping point, and then, like Hollywood, in the 50s and 60s got very stale and boring, and then in the 70s you had your Spielbergs and your Scorseses and your De Palmas coming through, personal things.
you are an optimist. I salute you.
It'll get worse first, I think.
Yeah.
But,
My experience, the thing about AI is you can use AI to detect AI. So artificial intelligence itself is built with a set of rules, and you can use artificial intelligence to find those rules.
there you go.
And so then it will start to cancel it out, and people will just say, no, that's just artificial intelligence, don't care about that anymore.
Brilliant.
So I think it's going to be like a wave that suddenly takes over, and it'll go away then. And we'll start using our noggins again.
Oh, excellent. Right, I like that.
It's Terminator.
Yeah, it's interesting you saying that, because I used to work for Coventry Education Department, and we found that some of the schools, before the kids did their GCSEs or A-levels, the teachers would actually type in to the internet some of their essays, and it would come up and say, this essay was written by so-and-so, and they'd be putting them online and selling them to kids in different schools.
Some of the work I did in the latter part of my real working career was to detect that sort of thing. So it was to detect the fact that people had done something that somebody else had done before,
Oh, okay.
and try and deplagiarise what we were producing.
Yeah,
And
because
artificial
some of
intelligence can do that
the
for us.
teachers would be reading essays in kids' books and thinking, this doesn't quite sound like them.
Well, one of the big, I'm sure you know this, Anthony, I'm sure you know this, is one of the big things in publishing is that people will take a story, change the names to protect the innocent, put it into Coventry rather than Redditch, make it about a female rather than a male, and then republish it. Now, Hollywood does that all the time. We only have to look at West Side Story to see that.
I've heard an author did this recently. There's a very popular book that is set in Britain, It's called something along the lines of, Good Girl's Guide to Murder.
Yeah.
It's British, but they published it in America. They changed all the settings to American. Same story, same book.
So that's the sort of thing that I would have looked for, and I would have used the cues that are in there to try and find out if it was plagiarism or not. I read some books while I was on holiday just now. They were written in the 30s, and they will absolutely translate into modern day. Do I want to go that far, or don't I? It's a choice we have to make, and artificial intelligence is so clever, it can detect itself.
Right.
It's so incestuous, it can detect that somebody is trying artificial intelligence to try and fool it, and can stop it, you can report it.
I like that, great.
So hopefully
Fingers crossed.
there'll be a tsunami of it, and then it'll go away again.
Yeah, that'd be nice. Right, I think we've got to wrap up. But
Okay.
would you like to do a reading from the book first? Before we...
I'm happy if that wouldn't be too tiresome for you. Right, just in case. Background is Marta is the main character. So she's the heroine, feisty heroine in this book. Her boyfriend, latest boyfriend, is Arpad. Arpad is mucking around a bit. He's disappearing a lot and he's not present a lot. His excuse is he's a very busy businessman and he's trying to pitch to the European Union equivalent in my book. So I'm over in Brussels a lot, etc., etc., etc. So this is a weekend where they have met and they've been out together. And they come to the following morning. Marta eased open her eyes and squinted at her dress and stockings, draped over the chair in the corner, bathed in the half-light seeping out from behind the bedroom curtains, excuse me. Her head throbbed and her lips were glued together. God, what a night. Reaching for her palm com, she read 0749. Thank God she was on a day off. Hearing Arpad's gentle snoring, she turned carefully and peered across at the outline of him beneath the duvet, lying on his side, his back turned towards her. He'd been on dazzling form last night, grinning from ear to ear as he recounted how he'd wined and dined a succession of MEPs, the glitzy ceremony at which his company's success had been announced. The most thrilling event of the trip had nothing to do with the Welcome Homes contract, though, he insisted, but the discovery of one of the earliest gangster movies ever made, the uncut version of a silent movie called Underworld, on his hotel's in-house entertainment system. Marta knew precious little about Arpad's work, but she had heard plenty about what he called his interests, assembling a library of classic gangster movies and buying and selling fine samurai figurines. You mean there's a gangster movie you haven't got? She jossed, amused by the length to which Arpad would go to satisfy his weird obsessions. Sure, there are 3, he said, laughing. Well, 2 now. I slipped the night porter a 50 to mail me a copy. He'd even suggested, during the short taxi ride from the restaurant to his place, that they watch the damn film. Marta was having none of that, though. How easy it had been to divert him. Another snort from Arpad, a bout of shuffling and groaning, interrupted Marta's reverie, prompting her to slip from the bed, pull on his dressing gown, and tiptoe from the room. After making herself coffee, Martha went through to the loft apartment's huge lounge area and spread herself across one of the sofas. With its Turkish rugs, modern art posters, and Arpad's treasured collection of bronze and terracotta warriors occupying the glass-fronted cabinets lining the long wall. This was one of her favourite places, somewhere she always felt pampered and safe. As she savoured the delicious coffee and absorbed the room's serenity, she could feel her headache retreating. Picking up the remote, she activated the huge con screen at the far end of the room and found herself staring at the mobster and his mob from the black and white film Arpad had started watching last night. Swiftly exiting the movie archive, she scrolled through Arpad's files, searching for the photos of Lena's weddings in the ground of the swanky Prince Constantine Hotel. She soon found what she was looking for and scrolled happily through the images. The 2 of them deep in conversation, joking with the bride and groom, dancing together beneath the lanterns. Everybody is smiling, it's such a special day. Marta paused and her face clouded over. Swinging her legs from the sofa, she sat up and studied the screen, confused as to the connection between the wedding and the photos now appearing. A series of what looked like surveillance shots of a young woman, seemingly unaware she is being photographed, hurrying along the street, buying a coffee, sitting in a car with another older woman, blonde and expensively dressed. Marta recognised the subject in the photographs, but couldn't quite place her. Then she realised it was the missing Ukrainian woman, Ludmila Fedoruk. But what was... She's a good-looking woman, eh? Marta, startled, span round to see Arpad standing in the doorway in his vest and boxer shorts. That concludes the lesson.
Thank you very much. Great.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for coming along. Really appreciate it. And I believe you've got some books to sell.
If anybody's interested in the book at nearly half price, £5, we have copies for sale. But thank you very much for attending this evening, and thank you,
Oh,
Martin,
thanks so
for
much for
inviting
coming.
me.
It's been a great talk. Thank you.
Cheers.